Great. Yeah, in which case, I would like to welcome you all to this talk today. It's the Real Public Seminar series today by Giorgos Kallis on political ecological economics and the nature of economic growth. And I'll give Giorgos is one of the three principal investigators of the Real project. He's an ecological economist, political ecologist, who's working on environmental justice and degrowth. And other than a bachelor's degree in chemistry, a master's in environmental engineering from Imperial College, he has a PhD in environmental policy from the University of Agen and a second master's in economics from Barcelona Graduate School of Economics. And today he is a professor, an ICRA professor in Barcelona. And yeah, I welcome you to take the floor. The talk will be about 30 minutes, and then we have time for Q&A. So looking forward to hearing from you, Giorgos.
Too many degrees, I realize now. Hope you haven't spoiled me. So thank you, Elena. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the talk. I want to talk about political ecological economics. So what do I mean by that label? I'm using that label to mark an economics useful for thinking differently about growth, and by extension, degrowth. Degrowth right now does not have its own explanation of why and how growth takes place. The last few years, I have tried retroactively, I would say, to look at some of the economic ideas that underpin the scholarship on degrowth and to start putting a little bit of the stones on building such an economic theory that supports degrowth. It's now 7 years, I think, that I've been teaching this material in our master's degree on political ecology and degrowth, where I'm giving every year a 10-hour course on degrowth and economics. The syllabus covers economic anthropology, ecological economics, and Marxist political economy, both classical Marxist political economy and feminist. And during these years that I've been teaching this course, I realized that the synthesis of these schools of thought is not only necessary, but it is also possible, and that it can provide solid economic foundations to degrowth. Now, by political ecological economics, and that's my starting definition, I mean an economics that combines the concerns of ecological economics with a broadly defined political ecology. And this is an interface we have been cultivating here in Barcelona for many years now, led by our mentor, Joan Martinez Alier. Now, you're going to ask, what is ecological economics and political ecology? And here is the answer. Ecological economics understands human economies as open systems that metabolize energy and resources to provide for people's needs and wants, producing along the way waste and increasing entropy. That's a core idea of ecological economics. Political ecology, in turn, postulates that social metabolism is shaped by power and conflict over the distribution of energy, land, and waste, but also power and conflict over knowledge. The categories we take for granted, political ecology teaches us, including big categories such as the economy, would be totally alien to other civilizations. So the synthesis I want to propose here mobilizes selectively elements from these 1+2 schools of thought. One is ecological economics, and the other two schools of thought are the ones composing together political ecology. So from ecological economics, I take the insight that human economies are powered by energy surplus. From Marxist political economy, I take the insight that the ruling class keeps for itself a disproportionate share of this surplus by exploiting workers along lines of class, gender, race, ethnicity, or geographic location. Finally, from anthropology and science and technology studies, I take the insight that this exploitation is legitimated by specific representations stabilized and institutionalized with the help of the science of economics. The function of these representations, I will argue, is to disguise the pursuit of private gain as being in the interest of the common good. So the rest of my presentation will proceed as follows. So first, I will found this tripartite synthesis that I talked about upon the notion of surplus. Second, I will illustrate a graphic, a basic scheme of the economic process based upon the extraction and circulation of surplus. Third, I will show how this scheme that I will present to you helps explain the biophysical and sociopolitical nature of growth. And fourth, using this understanding of growth, I will articulate also how I see degrowth. Finally, this will be the last part, I will mobilize the anthropological insights to argue that economic growth is not simply an epiphenomenon of capitalist accumulation, but it is the way political institutions organize, stabilize, and justify capital accumulation. So let's start with the first part, surplus. And here I start with a very basic insight from philosopher Georges Bataille, who in his book Accursed Share back in 1949 claimed that the general condition of humanity is not one of scarcity, as the economists want us to believe, but one of excess. Of course, there are specific temporal or spatial experiences of scarcity. But if humans and human civilization exists, this is because humans access the surplus of solar energy stored in plants, animals, and inside the bowels of the earth, as coal, oil, gas, etc. This is an excess surplus well over and above the calorific energy we spend to capture it. This size of this solar energy surplus, ecological economics teaches us, depends on the ratio between the energy invested to get energy and the energy we get in return. You might have heard the EROI indicator, energy return on energy invested. And it also depends, this surplus, on the efficiency with which this primary energy, or to use a more specific term, but that I don't have to define now, exergy, the efficiency with which this primary energy exergy is converted into final work. This determines how much of the original surplus captured from the sun is eventually available for human use. Let me use a few terms here that are going to be useful for the rest of the presentation. Let me call this energy surplus physical surplus. And the surplus that remains after this energy is put to work in a factory, for example, economic surplus. Now, the economic surplus is divided in two parts. Into the part that it's appropriated by private owners of land, resources, or means of production, which we can call private surplus, and the share that is controlled or taxed by political authorities, and which we can call, in line with others, social surplus. Now, mainstream economics has gone at lengths at studying how human ingenuity and technology have increased surplus. Think here as an example of the invention of the wheel that reduced the amount of energy lost as friction and heat during movement and increased physical surplus, what we could keep actually as energy we get from the sun. Or think of the famous Adam Smith's pin factory example, the example he gave in The Wealth of Nations, where social division of labor reduces wasted effort and increases economic surplus. Productivity, it's normally how it's presented, but in my terms, it's an increase of the economic surplus. Marx, however, revealed early on, and after the early political economists, how capitalists, such as the owners of the pin factory that Smith used for his example, exploit workers by paying them only the minimum necessary for their reproduction. The capitalists keeping for themselves what I called before private surplus and what Marx designated as surplus value, which is the surplus extracted from wage labor. Feminist and third world Marxists after Marx showed that the capitalist class extracts surplus not only by exploiting wage workers in the factory, they also appropriate the care work that mostly women do back home to reproduce the wage workers, and they expropriate, as we know from the work on unequal exchange, or they underpay racialized workers, not only abroad, but also home as immigrant labor often. The original source of physical surplus may be solar energy stored in plants and fossil fuels, but humans will always be needed until AI and robots do without us. But for the time being, we know that humans will always be needed to transform this physical surplus into goods and services. And the capitalist class will therefore always have an incentive to pay as little as possible back to the workers for their reproduction. Of course, certain workers in certain places and certain times may get, and they have got, a better deal than others, especially when extra energy surpluses are available, like it happened when we discovered oil. Dividing workers, indeed, by differential rewards has been crucial for the perpetuation of the dominant class. So let me here attempt to capture what I just talked about a little bit more visually, because I know that words can be tiring. So let's focus. I'll continue with words actually, but at least you can use your eyes also a little bit. So let's focus on this graph. It looks very complicated, but it's not. Actually, it's very silly and simple. So let's start from the left, as you see it in the screen, the brown boxes. So energy from the sun is appropriated by humans. This is the brown boxes at the left. Primary energy then, together with human and non-human work, is the fuel of the economic process. Ignore for a little the yellow box and move your attention to the light blue boxes at the center. So at the end, this original economic fuel, what does it produce? It produces the necessities that we need to reproduce ourselves as workers. It is used to produce non-necessities that I indicate in purple color, and I will return to explain what they are soon. And then a substantial share, we know from ecological economics, is lost during the economic process as waste and increased entropy. Now, what remains out of all that is the economic surplus. Now move back your attention towards the left and the yellow boxes that are in the center, surplus making. Surplus can increase in two ways. One way on top is through technological and organizational innovation, improvements in human productivity through education. This is what we mostly hear about, and this is what economists have studied to death, and they share among themselves the prizes for doing so. But we know quite well about that part of capitalist growth, no? Innovation, technology, knowledge, etc. But beneath that, one finds the uglier, darker side, we might call it, of surplus making, exploitation of wage workers, appropriation of unpaid care work, expropriation of racialized laborers, or the shifting of entropic costs to those with less power. Think here as an example of the Industrial Revolution. On the surface, the Industrial Revolution was the result of the invention by scientists of faster cotton spinning wheels, for example, in Manchester. And that's, of course, an important part of the story, not to be underestimated. But below the surface of the faster cotton spinning wheels in Manchester, thanks to scientists and engineers, there were the overexploited factory workers, the overexploited housewives back in the home, taking care of the overexploited factory workers. And of course, last but not least, there were the expropriated slaves picking cotton in colonial lands, lands which themselves were expropriated from the natives, from the Native Americans. How the final economic product is distributed between necessities and surplus, in the blue, light blue boxes again, depends on social and political struggle. And here are the pink boxes. The ruling class wants for itself as much as possible of what I called private surplus. The working majority instead needs the surplus for its own reproduction, reducing domination and exploitation, or for enjoying life through non-necessary expenditures, of which I will talk soon. This struggle, this socio-political struggle, is mediated by the political system and the institutions that control part of the economic surplus and turn it into social surplus through taxes, regulation, or public production. On the one extreme, the political system can be fully captured by the ruling class, the capitalist class in the case of capitalist economies, turning almost all social surplus into private surplus. On the other end, the working masses can take control of the political system and redirect surplus towards their needs and necessities. In between scenarios, the ruling class exerts disproportionate power over the political system, but the political system has a certain degree of autonomy and is partially, at least, controlled by the working people. Now, let me close the presentation of the diagram by explaining the purple boxes. These are what Bataille called the accursed share, which was the title of his 1949 book. I apologize for my Greek accent. Probably you didn't understand what I said, but you can quickly Google the title of the book. But basically, he was talking about the curse of humans, the unbearable weight for us humans, which is the decision with what to do with the surplus energy, the excess that the sun so generously gives to us. You need to switch your mindset now from economics, which is like scarcity, we don't have enough energy, to the basic fact that actually we have much more than we need, and this is thanks to the sun. It's a little bit of a more paradisic view of our condition on Earth. Now, what is the accursed care about? What is this curse? The curse is what to do with this surplus, whether we spend it into potlatches, whether we spend it into pyramids, whether we spend it into churches and ceremonies, or whether we spend it and invest it into new factories and AI. This is what gives each society and each civilization its unique flavor. Humans, and let me emphasize this here, find meaning not by satisfying their bare necessities, but by spending surplus beyond necessity. This is what mobilizes us to work, and this is what we are often ready to die for. Unproductive expenditure, or dépense in Bataille's native French, to which I do injustice. This dépense can be privatized, as it mostly is today. Think of you having a party alone home, or you just wasting yourself with the substances you prefer alone. Or it can be collective and disastrous dépense, as in armies and in wars. Or it can be collective and beautiful or joyful, as in carnivals, feasts, or works of public art. Or surplus can be simply set aside, as it is set aside when we keep certain lands that could be productive, we keep them idle, when we keep minerals under the earth, or where we give ourselves free time for leisure, contemplation, or whether we leave land, minerals, and ourselves free of working, simply for leaving also space for non-humans. With this basic framework that I now set, let me turn to the question I said here. What is growth if we follow this logic? So simply put, growth is the investment of surplus, private and social, into extracting more surplus by innovation and by domination. When surplus creates more surplus, we have growth. I often hear arguments like, why can't we have growth by spending on good things like renewables or in sports? There's nothing bad about them, no? So you can have nice growth. Well, an important thing of my graph here is that you can't just grow by spending. If you spend labor and energy into, say, sports, you must take it out from somewhere else, say cars or car production. This would be zero growth if you take something from here and you give it there. To have growth, you must have an excess capacity that allows you to increase sports without decreasing cars. This excess is precisely what I call surplus. If you spend this surplus all at once into sports, which would be nice, I like sports, then this is the punch, and your surplus is over. Only if you invest a substantial part of this surplus back to making more surplus, you can have continuous compound growth. Where are the limits to growth in this model? I presented this 2 weeks ago, and people told me, you talk about the growth, you talk about limits, and in your graph, there's nothing about limits. That was nice. Indeed, there wasn't something in the graph, but I have to explain where limits appear here. So limits emerge if the physical surplus extracted from nature stagnates, be it by falling energy returns on the energy invested, or by limits in the efficiency with which primary energy is converted into work. Limits can be overcome. If you remember the graph, they can be overcome either by innovation that increases conversion efficiency, or by the bottom part, intensified domination. The latter, of course, also faces the limit, and is the limit of human endurance, or if you want, the limit of the threat of a revolution when people are too much exploited. Can growth be green and equitable or inclusive? Because we hear a lot about inclusive growth, green growth, etc. And if we think in terms of GDP, of course, everything is possible now. If we think in terms of the model I provided here, I think we have a better grammar to think about this question. I would say, yes, you could have green and equitable growth, but the window is very, very narrow. If you think that surplus by innovation, just by innovation, can increase enough to offset reduced domination, which is what I understand as equity or inclusion, as well as reduced appropriation of surplus from nature, which is what I understand as green, then you can have green and equitable growth. But historical experience and models and all the data right now suggests that this is very unlikely. To the extent that we've seen economic growth, all forms of surplus making are mobilized, not just one. A crucial question here, of course, is this. Can technological innovation be separated from domination exploitation, or are they intrinsically entangled? Why is this important? Because if we think that this box up there, innovation can on its own offset for domination and appropriation from nature, then maybe you can have something that looks like green and inclusive growth, historically impossible as it seems. But the crucial question is technological innovation really separate from that, or it relies by necessity on domination and nature appropriation? If there is such an entanglement, is it specific to capitalism, or is it unavoidable in any other conceivable system? And if the answer is the latter, I think this leaves us on uncharted waters regarding the use of advanced technology beyond capitalism. So my last point, where do I position degrowth in all this, in this model? So to go back to it, degrowth, I would say, following the grammar I present here, is a trajectory whereby much less surplus will be invested back to make surplus, bringing therefore growth most likely to an end. Surplus, why surplus will not go to make more surplus? Because surplus will be redistributed towards the satisfaction of necessities, reducing domination all the way towards a classless society, where there will not be exploitation or appropriation or expropriation or cost shifting. Surplus also in a degrowth society would be dedicated to collective unproductive expenditures that build and not destroy community. And surpluses, one would add, would be set aside or redirected towards regenerating ecosystems. For all this to happen, to bring us back to the political question, it is obvious that working people must want this to happen. There's no one else who would do that for them, because if you leave it to the ruling or capitalist class, the surplus will go back to making more surplus. So working people first must want all this to happen, and second, take control of the political system from the ruling class and make it happen. Now, the model I proposed here, you might argue, echoes similar arguments, although I hope I make them a little bit visually clearer, but it echoes similar arguments made by eco-feminist and third-world Marxists who have highlighted, like me, the crucial roles of nature, patriarchy, racism, and unequal exchange in capital accumulation. So given this strong Marxian flavor of my account, one might wonder, why do I talk at all about economic growth, and isn't it all about capital accumulation? So let me make three remarks here. First, I see economic growth, and please keep my model here in mind, otherwise the whole thing might not make sense. So having the visual in the back of our minds, I see economic growth as the reinvestment of both private and social surplus. And I distinguish there the broader process of economic growth, where the state might also be the one investing surplus into surplus. I distinguish it hence from a more narrowly defined capital accumulation that involves reinvestment of private surplus only. That is, reinvestment only by those who privately own the means of production. Indeed, I would argue we can have, and we have had, non-capitalist socialist systems without capital accumulation, but with economic growth. Surplus was controlled and reinvested fully by the political system without a capitalist class. Now, some people have called this state capitalism. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if it was capitalism. I think it was simply put economic growth. It's true that competition among private capitals makes growth more of an imperative and less of a choice under capitalism. But to the extent, however, that national defense and offense in some cases, and national position and control of resources in the world system depend on comparative growth, growth imperatives might unfortunately extend and continue to be present even beyond capitalism. But I think we can worry less about beyond capitalism since we are very much entangled within capitalism and it doesn't seem we are exiting anytime soon. So let's focus on capitalist systems because they are the ones who are dominant right now. And I think we can postulate that within capitalist systems, economic growth, the way I defined it, is an important precondition for capitalist accumulation. In fact, a prevalent feature of capitalist economies is the tendency of political systems, captured as they are, partially or fully by the ruling class, to reduce or direct social surpluses and to amend regulations, such as land or pollution codes, to facilitate growth and by extension, capital accumulation. I would even argue that economic growth is the name given to the set of collective actions political authorities take to facilitate capital accumulation. Third, and in relation, economic growth plays an ideological function. It allows, and this is an argument that our colleague Bengi Akbulut in Canada has made, it allows aligning semantically and practically the private with the social interest, mixing private and social surplus under the overall rubric of economic growth. So it allows dressing private gain in the clothes of the common good. Just to say no politician is ever elected saying, I will make elites richer, no? The politician is elected saying, I promise growth. Anthropology here and science and technology studies, and I use here one thinker that I teach in the course, as I said, but also one teacher that one scholar that I think has made the most remarkable contribution, and for some reason within our small community of post-growth, degrowth, and ecological economics has gone unnoticed, not among my students, because the first class I teach, and I really give everything to this class, I really enjoy it. It's Timothy Mitchell, and this essay on economentality. I know that Timothy Mitchell is writing a full book on growth. You can see some of his lectures that he gave at SOAS. It's complicated material, so I'm looking forward to the whole book. But it helps us here to think a little bit deeper into the ideological and material function of growth under capitalism. Generally saying, anthropologists teach us that all societies provided for their needs and exchange goods. But it is only our society, our capitalist society, if you want, in civilization, that conceived and organized all these activities as being part of a thing called the economy. Indeed, the notions of economy and economic growth are quite recent, Timothy Mitchell argues in this essay. The noun the economy, referring to a separate national system, appears in the US as late as the late 1930s, and it appears in the conjuncture of the Great Depression and the Second World War. As governments, Roosevelt at that time, stepped in and planned production and money supply, first to avoid the new crash and then to manufacture guns to win the war, frequent references started appearing in the press and in government reports referring to a new system called the economy. I'm going to be doing like that all the time so that you know that I'm talking about the economy, you know, like this particular object of inquiry and governing that appears in this moment in time. It is the time that we have also new metrics such as GDP and new institutions such as ministries of national economy appearing to represent and govern this system. And this instituted imaginary, imagining that there is a thing out there called the economy, became real through repetition, through annual reports, annual data on GDP, but also through its effects. Money were redistributed on the basis of this new way of representing reality called the economy. And these effects were very real. After the Second World War, power over people in the US and in Europe was increasingly exercised through and in the name of the economy. And people increasingly governed themselves for the good of the economy. This is what Timothy Mitchell calls economentality, a new form of power and government, a new form of governmentality, if you know Michel Foucault's work. The invention of growth was crucial here in making this new form of power function. Economists before the 1930s would talk of temporary increases in trade or riches. That a thing called the economy could grow without end was an idea of the late 1940s. It is one that allowed to visualize, Mitchell argues, a stable future and to bring it into calculations and compromises in the present. The promise of growth, in other words, pacified rebellious workers by promising them a better future tomorrow, if they considered today. And growth, the idea of growth, could visualize and represent this stable future of tomorrow, where everyone would be richer and there would be more to redistribute. Growth was and is therefore a political project crucial for stabilizing capitalism socially. At an ideological level, it provides a frame around which working people consent to their exploitation and the redirection of surplus away from their needs. And at a material level, it secures the conditions for continued capital accumulation. These material foundations of growth, however, cannot be taken for granted. And this is where we need to move from anthropology back to political economy and ecological economics. And this is precisely what Mitchell also does in his essay. If these material foundations crumble, so will the ideological edifice of consent. I mean, you cannot be promising growth if there is no growth to begin with, no? Mitchell brings in his essay back the ecological economics and geopolitical economy, linking the invention of GDP and growth in the US to the shift from domestic coal produced in Europe or in the US to oil from the Middle East. Not only the physical surpluses of this oil propelled US growth, the energy surplus I called about, the physical surplus, and made the imaginary representation of a stable, prosperous future seem for a while real, but the shift away from coal weakened America's powerful coal miner and dock worker unions that they were bringing the country to a still at that time. Violence, instead of being perpetrated against the striking workers, would now be safely exercised out of view upon Orientalized others in the Middle East. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. I'm happy to hear your questions and share some loose threads that there are in my argument and that I know them. I have an extra slide with things that I know I need to develop in this argument, but I wait to see if they are the same ones you think. I want to thank everyone for your attention, and I have to give a big thank to my co-authors because this is a paper which is in progress. It is taking time, but it's a collective product of a writing collective we have made, those of us who are both in the university and the Research and Degrowth Association out of the university. I want also to thank my collaborators in the REAL project for the amazing intellectual environment they have helped create, and to the European Research Council, this public body that trusted us with its grant and gave us some of the social surplus to cover our basic needs and a little bit beyond. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Giorgos. Applause from all sides. While I'm talking, someone in the chat asked if you could put on the link to the master's course that you showed on one of your very first slides. That would be great. And now I'll be guiding us through this discussion. And yeah, I mean, Giorgos, you made a great synthesis of different schools of thought and what they mean for growth and degrowth. You also talked about various inequalities that we face, and I tried to take this into account in guiding the discussion. So in addition to the order in which you raise your hand, I will also try to see that we have non-cis men and maybe give priority to non-cis men and non-white people. Obviously, this is limited in the realm of this, like in this virtual realm. So you can also just drop me a personal message if you feel more comfortable with that. And with this announcement, I look around my colleagues here. I see 2 hands up in the virtual room. And yeah, maybe we start here with Stefan and then Hug. Or I'm sorry for mispronunciation if that's the case. Take it away, please.
Hi, thank you, Elena, and thank you, Giorgos, for the presentation. I really liked it. I didn't know what to expect today, so I'm happy that I'm here. And I'm particularly happy that you, as far as I understood, are working on combining Marxist and feminist and ecological economics or exergy economics. So I think that's a great endeavor. I have 2 points that I want to ask and mention, and the first one is the more important one. So, as I said, I really like this idea of the combining the theories, and basically, I'm wondering whether it might be useful to also have a look at other economics theory, schools of thought, and in particular post-Keynesian thought. And that is related to, I think, an interesting debate that we could have regarding what is surplus. And in neoclassics and post-Keynesian, you rather argue or talk about savings and investments. And I mean, with Marx, it's you have surplus and you can reinvest it. And post-Keynesians would actually say, well, this is not how the actual capitalist economy works. There, it's rather you can take money into your hand. You just get a credit, a loan from the bank, and then you go and buy something that is then produced because there are excess capacities in machinery and in people. And I think I would say they are right. And I think that brings an additional perspective on the matter, how surplus is reinvested, etc. So that's the main point, and then just a minor thing. I think from your overview of including all these different aspects, what I'm missing. I mean, there's always something missing, right? Because you already have so much, but what I'm missing is the feedback into like we destroy nature. How does that impact again this entire overview? I think you know what I mean. So in various aspects, climate change, etc. Thanks.
Okay, maybe we take a question of Hug and then one question from the chat. And then are you fine with 3 questions, Yodros? Perfect.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Giorgos, for this great presentation. I have a couple of quick questions. The first one, given that you engage with Marxist political economy, I was wondering what is the role rent plays in your theory of surplus, given that rent is a critical momentum in critical Marxist theory. So differential rents, absolute rent, etc., whether you have thought about it and the relation with land. And then my second question, it's not a question of yes or no, but to what extent this theorization can engage with the changing political economy of digital capitalism. It's an open question, very broad, but because sometimes we think about the economy as 20th century industrial economy and how this intersects with platform economy, digital economy. Thanks.
Okay, and then I will read out a question that has been posted on the chat. So, Yorgos, your model of growth suggests the existence of a fundamental causal structure that underpins a capitalist economy, which may act as the primary mover for modifying the behavior of economic agents towards growth. Have you identified such a causal structure?
Can you tell me again? Sorry. Just so that I process
Yes.
it.
Yeah, so I read out again.
The causal structure of how the economic agents become part of that. Is that the question, right?
I think it's also the causal structure which acts on modifying how economic agents behave towards growth.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you all. It's a great question. So post-Keynesianism, yes, let me establish this, and then people who know more about post-Keynesianism could add it. Hopefully, you, Stefan. I mean, it's not an answer to say that I don't know enough from post-Keynesianism to integrate it. You could tell me, then learn, and that would be a right response. But it is partly the truth that this is the material that I've tried and that I've seen making sense to me up to now. But what you told me challenged me that I have to think more, because I thought I could position some of the things post-Keynesianism is about as being an expenditure of surplus that stabilizes the whole system, especially in periods of overaccumulation or crisis. But what you told me kind of changed also how the causal dynamic works, you know, that you take the loan and then you mobilize the productive resources with a loan. That probably I would have to think much better to see how it fits in this model.
Okay, just very shortly.
Yeah.
I think the thing is that Marx talks about value and Keynesians talk about money, and this is where the difference lies, I would argue.
Yeah, and there, okay, this I can respond to more. I mean, there, then I side with Marx also because as an ecological economics, we have, I think, in parallel to Marx, we have insisted on that we have to that money is a fetishized appearance of something that is going beyond the surface. I mean, this is also what Alf Hornborg has argued, what Joan Martinez Allier has been arguing. So I prefer to look below the surface on the real surplus that it's coming out of energy that takes different instances. It appears also as human energy, which is labor, and it's what Marx talked about, but also the energy we appropriate from solar power, from crops and fossil fuels. So yes, in that sense, I'm more materialistic, and that's why I call it political ecological economics. But we need to integrate that with the insights of Keynes, but I think it's a little bit of a talk at a different language, you know. The other day that I presented, people talked to me about Ricardo. It's, again, I was caught without doing my full homework. I looked a little bit into Ricardo, and I realized that Ricardo, like Baron in the political economy of growth, like the idea of surplus there, again, is in money terms. It's like what remains after you pay wages, right? And I think my approach is different, you know. It's like it's a little bit of a more fundamental physical understanding of surplus. Now, whether it's useful or not, I don't know, but I think for degrowth, it's definitely has a certain usefulness. Impact of destroying nature and how it's there, yes, it's on my to-do list. I got this comment also the other time. It speaks to the comment that I said that I made a visual that at the end doesn't have limits to growth and doesn't have destruction of nature, which is where we started from, right? And I've studied environmental science, so I should have had it. Ug, that's how his name is pronounced. He's good at giving hugs, maybe, but he's Ug, not hug. Ug, rent. In my model, rent is a part of the private surplus. So it's a surplus that the ruling class keeps for itself, and the ruling class can be the landowning class or the capitalist class, which nowadays is one and the same. No, there are no longer aristocrats that only have land. So for me, I might be saying something silly here, but I think also the way surplus value or the value that capitalists keeps for themselves just by owning the means of production is a form of rent. It's not rent from land, it's rent from owning the means of production. I would need to think whether there is some fundamental difference that I'm missing there. But in my model, these are different forms of surplus making that we might call it rent or we might call it elsewhere. So one instance would be the rent from land, another would be the rent or what you keep from owning the means of production. Another one could be from, and that's where Elena will tell me that I miss a lot, finance, which is a bit of a blind spot here. Digital capitalism. I mean, that's a good question. For me, I was thinking the other day whether if I was to use this model, how I can think about AI and the impact it will make on growth. And you know, then I read there is a piece by the Economist on whether there are some people who say that with AI you can have 20% growth per year or 40, you know, all the way to quickly infinity. And So then I was reading it, and the arguments that they were making, they were not really neoclassical supply and demand. They were like some fundamental arguments that I could all position within this graphic. They were like, okay, either you increase the number of humans, but then energy is gonna put a roadblock. So I could position it a little bit in terms of this. But of course, it doesn't provide the full picture. No, it's not a model that can explain why platform capitalism emerged and not something else. But if we want to think of the effects of platform capitalism on growth and degrowth, maybe. But as all representations, and that's something also to take from anthropologists, right, and from STS, all representations have a particular use, and they simplify a complex reality in something you want to highlight, but it doesn't mean that they are perfect, right? The final one about economic agents, like my thinking is not agent-based, or it's not in these terms, right? So it's much more power-based and class-based. So I'm thinking about workers and different type of workers, care workers, wage workers, non-wage workers, volunteer workers, rentiers, or those who own the means of capital, and the political system in between. If we think of economic agents are ourselves and how are we impelled to become part of this model that we consent to our exploitation in return for perhaps a better spoil than others who are exploited more? So how are we part of this machine? I think this is what I try to get at the end with Timothy Mitchell and Economentality, because governmentality is precisely that. Why and how do we govern ourselves without needing to be governed? And I think this mechanism of the economy is important there, but I don't think in terms of agents and behaviors and these things.
Okay. Do you want to comment on the last question?
It was the last one.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. No. Sorry. I did.
I was talking about agents and behavior, right? Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. In which case, I have a question here that I'm reading out for someone who sent it to me in private. So in some sense, much of what we see with climate change in society is an aspect of surplus. Surplus rainfall, surplus heat, surplus storms, surplus inequality, etc. I wonder if there's merit in relooking at political ecology and economy with a perspective of sufficiency rather than surplus. Instead of harnessing the surplus from the physical, private, and social aspects, would it make sense to reword it as social sufficiency, private sufficiency, physical environmental sufficiency, breaking away from the terminology associated with capitalism and creating an alternative grounds for conversation action? This is a question, and then sorry, the chat is moving fast. Are there any people who would like to speak out? Then they can raise their hand virtually. Otherwise, I will read out the questions that have been posted in the chat. I see a theme. I'll take one more from the chat. What could be the legal institutions that we need to implement or create if we want to degrowth in cooperation context? And then over to Yefim.
Yeah, thanks, Giorgos. That was thought-provoking. My question is, like, based on your distinction, I guess, between economic growth and capital accumulation, like, what do you think we as degrowthers should put our main focus on, or kind of like, what do you see as the sort of main things to pivot to?
Okay, there's 3 questions, and there is the request for you to stop sharing the screen. In that case, I think people can see each other better. Great.
Yeah, sorry.
Over to you.
And I can see you better, so it's better for me too. Climate disasters as a bad case of surplus. I need to think that this is too fast for my brain to process, but it's interesting. Sufficiency. Yes, of course. I mean, I'm interested on sufficiency. The growth is all about sufficiency, but we need to understand first of all, what is growth in order to think about sufficiency. Sufficiency is a normative ideal that we want, but I don't think it's an explanation of why and how growth takes place. So my intention here was to create a different understanding of why and how growth works, so that then we can position the growth in relation to that. I see Elke here. I don't know. it's third in my view here, but Elke had written something very similar, I think, when she argued like Elke Pirgmager, sorry. Ecological economics is based on steady state economics, but steady state economics is just like a normative response without questioning the model that explains how the economy works. So it takes neoclassical economics as the model that explains what the economy is and how it works, and then it imposes on it like a normative foundation. We need to have a steady state of material use, or we need to be sufficient. But if you don't change how you understand that the model works, and you understand the model in the terms you are taking it, your normative counter proposal just stays in the air, So I think what I try to do here is argue that we are in a stage right now with 15 years or so of degrowth research, but also with centuries before of ecological economics and Marxist political economy and feminist economics and anthropology and all these lines of thinking on the economy, or the economic broadly defined. We are in a position to propose also a different understanding of what economic growth is and how it works. And it unfortunately works with surplus. We might not like the term, but that's how it works according to my proposal, at least. And I think if we understand it, then we can position what we want also better. Otherwise, we just understand it as GDP, which is like a fetishized magic thing. And then we just argue there are limits, or we should limit, or we should live sufficiently. But without understanding how the whole beast works, I don't think these proposals go very far. Legal institutions, they're a bit out of the purview of what I presented today, but I welcome people to look into our article, the review of the post-growth literature published in Lancet Planetary Health, post-growth, the science of well-being within planetary boundaries. We have at least 10 policies and associated institutions there that could be implemented in the current context and brings us closer to a post-growth trajectory. Yefim, the main thing to pilot too, I mean, it's very simplistic here, but it's the political battle, no? It's how to redirect the surplus away from the capitalist class, and also how to redirect the part of the surplus that the political system controls towards less domination and regeneration. To go back also to what Stefan asked at the beginning, that this arrow is not very clear in my diagram, but we need also resources. Instead of going surplus into making more surplus, going into regenerating the already destroyed ecosystems.
Okay, anyone who would like to intervene? Otherwise, I have one question in the chat, which I'll just read out. A growing body of research has been worked to debunk the myth that human population size drives ecological destruction. I wonder if you have any plans to address this work, and then referring to the work of thinkers like Emily Clancher, Merchant, and Jade Sether. We have this one. Anyone else in the room? No? Okay, otherwise, maybe you want to take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know these thinkers. I don't know if they're saying that population drives it or doesn't drive it. But I think there are many thinkers in political ecology that for decades now have proved that it doesn't drive, that it is driven actually, rather than it is driving anything. And probably, I consider this conversation closed, but I'm always surprised that it remains open, and it remains open in both ways, both for those who keep going back to overpopulation and by those now who keep going into underpopulation. So people are obsessed with population. Either it's too much or it's too little, or it's both too much and too little at the same time. And from political ecology, we know why they're obsessed, because when you're obsessed with a category population, you control people. So it's a mode of controlling people. It's a mode of governmentality. Governmentality is actually the control of people through population. Economentality through economy. So it's a main mode of control, and I honestly find it Yes, a question that I don't put my energies anymore in. But if someone challenges me on that, I'll put it. I even disagreed with Herman Daly once on that precisely because he's someone I respect a lot and I've learned from. I disagreed on his views on population. If you're interested, you can find it. If you put my name and Herman Daly and population, you will see where I stand there. Yeah.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left for interventions. Fabrizio.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm in the car. I hope you can hear me well.
Be
Can
careful you don't crash, eh?
Hey, Giorgos, nice to see you again.
I see.
From a grateful alumni in 2017. My question is regarding your graph, your schema. I was wondering whether, you know, the upper part of the yellow, light brown boxes. Can we say that only ideas fall into that area, and whenever ideas are taken to production, they fall into the exploitation, etc. part, the lower part? Can that be conceptually correct? And yeah, that's my question. And I guess maybe going back to AI, can AI be put into those terms as well? AI as an idea, and then AI taken into reality is a completely form of exploitation of many different things, humans, non-humans, etc.
Yeah, that's what I left as an.
Can I add, just because it also refers to your graphic? I'm actually wondering if I understood correctly that is the graphic to mean to depict like more a general way in which societies organize, or do you say that this is kind of more specific about how capitalist societies organize? Because I feel like you can spell it out for capitalism, but then I'm wondering if you have thought about it as a more general pattern in which we can think about how societies organize and how they organize around surplus. I would be curious to hear that, and maybe if you could give us a short answer, and then we will have to close. Thank you.
Yeah, let me start with the second, with your Elena. No, I think of it as a general one, but with a word of caution. No, I'm someone who criticizes people who have generalized views of all societies. So precisely the lesson we take from anthropology is that each society is differently organized, has different concepts, different meanings. So it's not meant to be a universal theory that applies everywhere in all times. But to the extent that we want to depict general human material provisioning, I think it's one way of representing it, that it's useful for the purposes that I set about here to understand economic growth, etc. It's not specific to capitalism. So specific to capitalism, I think a representation like the one David Harvey has made, the circuits of capital, and which I used to teach Marx, is much better through categories of capital, through categories of capitalism. Mine is meant to be a little bit more universal, and could be to any system that grows, let's say. So any system that grows must be doing this thing, like putting surplus back to surplus, whether it's socialist or whether it was the Egyptians for a while, doesn't make a difference. You need the political system or a ruling class that take the surplus and bring it back, and this surplus is invested into exploiting people more or developing some more productive form of technology. You could even argue that, whatever growth took place, growth in terms of population due to the invention of wheel or other technological innovations, can be positioned in this model. So I don't mean it's specific to capitalism, but if you want to specify it in capitalism, if you call the ruling class capitalist and rentier class, then you have capitalism. Fabrizio, no, that's the open question I gave, so I don't have an answer. To what extent we can say that the moment the technology becomes material, it needs to have in it some degree of exploitation and domination. I was writing something based on this line of thinking now for a volume in tribute of Alf Homburg, an ecological economist and political ecologist, and early political ecological economics, I would say, from the University of Lund. Alf is arguing, but contradictory. At some points in his work, he's arguing that if you have machines, you must have exploitation. But then at some point he says, oh, if we could change the system, and changing the money system, we could have machines for the good things, but not for the bad things. And I think we're all caught a little bit in this tension there, because if we take that any machine needs exploitation and domination, then we are in trouble, because we are advocating, or we are imagining only a world that would be horizontal without any machinery. But my terms there are blunt. I think we can use different terms. We can unpack a little bit more what's going on in there. So the relationship between technology broadly defined and domination broadly defined is where I would like to learn more from other people.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for your talk, for the presence of everyone. We've come to the end of the seminar. There's a few more questions in the chat. I don't know if you, Giorgos, want to stay 5 more minutes with people, or just, yeah, maybe the people can just send Giorgos an email with their questions thereafter.
Elena, do we keep this? Because for my interest also, I would like to have the questions. Do we keep them somewhere, or they will disappear the moment we exit?
Okay, now the technical people on the Barcelona side need to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the chat is being recorded with the recording.
It's very hard. So,
It's hard to find.
so maybe Giorgos should be made host, and then he can do copies
Yeah.
of the chat.
Okay, I'm host. Okay.
You are host, and so maybe take your private copy of the chat, then you have the names. And yeah, and for people who haven't been able to raise that question, get in touch with Giorgos. And yes, the recording will be made available. On the link has been posted in the chat as well. There's a YouTube channel called Real Post-Growth Talks, so you should be able to find it there. Yeah, again here, Bruno, thank you so much for reposting it for everyone who's interested. And the slides, again, from the technical side, I don't know if I think the slides, maybe people interested in the slides. Giorgos, are you happy that they drop you an email?
Yes, please.
Okay, please do so, because I'm not aware that we will post them somewhere publicly. Okay, good afternoon to everyone, and hopefully see you next time.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.